So welcome to our conference on emerging research on beginning farmers and ranchers. I'm Jeff Hopkins, and I work for the Economic Research Service, which is a USDA agency. I'm chief of the Farm Economy Branch. The Farm Economy Branch studies the financial well-being of the farm sector and farm households, and it's here where we carry out research on beginning farmers and ranchers. We hope that you will remain engaged throughout the presentations and discussions over the course of the next day and a half, and have organized the sessions thematically. We also have built-in networking time as well so that you can get to know others with shared interests. Use the lounge feature as you would at an in-person conference, although here you would use text and video to talk to other attendees. The lounge is live and available now and throughout the conference and will be staffed by the Farm Foundation if you have any questions at all. You will be hearing from me again and again throughout the conference. Thanks again for participating, and if you experience any problem at all, I need to know about it, so please feel free to get in touch with me anytime. We will now begin our first session focused on agricultural credit.
Good morning. My name is Gary Matteson. I work for the Farm Credit Council, the trade association for the National Farm Credit System located in Washington, D.C. In the course of my job with Farm Credit, I spend a lot of time with beginning farmers, those who train beginning farmers, and those who lend money to beginning farmers. And this session is about credit for those beginning farmers. You know, for many of them, many people involved in agriculture, and many of those beginning farmers in particular, obtaining credit seems to overwhelm all other considerations. So I want to put that in perspective, perhaps just a little bit, by saying a few years ago, I was asked by a farm organization to introduce the topic of beginning farmers and what I thought were the biggest challenges in their first 5 years on the farm. And I really think that those biggest challenges are inside the beginning farmers, how they react to difficulties. And they're less about external factors like access to land or to credit. There's some management skills that beginning farmers really need to have. They have to act like a manager in the way they think and their character. They need financial responsibility, the saving money from wages to achieve specific goals. They need a strong business sense, the ability to describe what their mission is, what their vision is, what they're trying to accomplish in a strategic plan, an operating plan, and an ability to pencil it out, to be able to really put numbers on the problems that they're going to face. Another characteristic of beginning farmer management skills that are really necessary is really cultivating some reasoned decision-making ability that can support their decisions. And beginning farmers really need to understand their role, what others expect of them, and to understand their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think that management skill is the essence of how a beginning farmer needs to change their perspective and how they relate to credit, because credit is one of those things where someone else is evaluating you, your capacities, your ability to repay that loan, your character, those 5 C's of credit. All of those things add up to a leadership capacity that really means for that beginning farmer the ability to solve external problems like access to land or qualifying for credit or being profitable in their chosen field. So as we listen to the research presented by the panelists today, let's be mindful that farmers are not just farmers. They are, in fact, rural entrepreneurs. Their farm business success and all of the other farm businesses that they're likely to start are essential to the economic health of the communities across the country. The jobs, the payroll, and the wealth that beginning farmer enterprises will create are the basis of a locally productive economy and a rising standard of living for beginning farmers and for their neighbors. The communities in which beginning farmers operate their farm businesses reap the benefits of going local. Local businesses give more to charity, they adapt more easily to rising labor and environmental standards, and they produce more wealth that stays in the community. Beginning farmer businesses are an essential part of the mix of rural entrepreneurs that will keep communities economically and socially healthy far into the future. It matters less what type of farm operation beginning farmers have than that those enterprises are productive and financially sound. So as we talk about beginning farmers, let's keep in mind that they're not just farmers. They're involved in their communities. They're on school boards. They're county commissioners. They do many other things, and their ability to interact with and access credit is one of those great things that will help them accomplish more in their careers and be a better part of their community. Productive, financially sound beginning farms are likely going to be the users of farm business credit. This panel is going to examine different aspects of business success, serving the unique needs of farmer veterans, availability of credit to socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, and what credit enhancements are most needed by beginning farmers and ranchers. After the panelists present their findings, we'll have the opportunity for discussion with you, our audience. Please type your questions into the chat box as the session goes along, and that will allow us to see the topics you're interested in. And also note you can like a particular question to indicate that you think it's important and worthy of discussion. Everything is in the attendee hub, including the button that finds us here in this session or any of your sessions. You can visit the virtual lounge to network and collaborate with others. These will all be recorded, and should you feel the urge to tweet or engage in social media, please tag all of your posts with that hashtag. And I would say with that, our first panelist of this session on credit is Nigel Key of the USDA Economic Research Service. Nigel?
Thanks, Gary, for the introduction. Let me just, as Gary said, my name is Nigel Key. I'm an economist with the Economic Research Service. I can move to the next slide, please. So my talk is about credit and farm business success, and I want to just start by talking about how we can measure farm business success. Some research has focused on measures of farm financial performance, which has included measures of liquidity, solvency, profitability, and efficiency. And this research has examined how farm and operator and household characteristics can affect these financial outcomes. When researchers have access to panel data, then it becomes possible to track farm performance over time. Much of this research is focused on estimating determinants of farm survival, or exit rates, and farm growth. Next slide, please. A limitation with separately considering farm survival and growth outcomes is that neither alone provides a satisfactory indicator of success. Surviving is obviously necessary for farm business success, but it's not sufficient. If a farm is shrinking in size, this could indicate that a farmer didn't earn enough profits to make their loan payments, so had to liquidate assets in order to stay in business. On the other hand, if a farm is expanding, this likely means that the owners invested in their operation and had positive expectations of future earnings. So taking into account the fact that both survival and growth influence success, we define a successful farm in this research as one that remains in business and grows in size over a 5-year period. Next slide, please. So how can credit affect beginning farm success? Credit can provide financial cushion for farmers that can allow them to remain in business during difficult economic times. And credit can allow farmers to purchase land and other inputs, allowing them to become larger. Now, by increasing farm size and hence economies of scale, credit can allow for the purchase and adoption of new technologies, and credit can raise farm productivity and income. A more profitable farm will be more likely to survive and grow, and hence credit could increase farm business success rates. Next slide, please. For beginning farmers, credit is likely to be particularly important because beginning farmers are younger and often have not had the chance to save and acquire sufficient land, buildings, and machinery. Because they tend to operate smaller farms, they lack economies of scale and have a strong need to expand their operations. Being younger also means they have a longer time horizon for their investments, So it makes more sense for younger farmers to incur the sunk costs associated with starting a new farm enterprise or purchasing a new piece of equipment. But while beginning farmers have a strong demand for credit, they're also more likely to be credit constrained. Many lenders ration loans based on the borrower's income, and many loans require collateral, which in turn requires savings. So credit constraints are one of the main rationales for government financed credit programs. So a key objective of this research is to understand how important credit constraints are for beginning farmer success. Next slide, please. The data I use are from the 2007, 12, and 17 Census of Agriculture. We use farm level data and match farms across consecutive censuses, which allows us to observe farm performance over time. So for example, we can observe how a beginning farm in 2007 was doing 5 years later. Did the farm survive? How much did it grow? Was it successful? We limit the sample to beginning farms, defined as those in which the principal operator reported 10 or fewer years of farming experience in the initial period. Next slide, please. So the next couple slides, I'm going to show you 3 statistics for different groups of farms. These statistics will be the survival rate, which is the share of all farms in the category that have a principal operator who responded in the following census, so they were still in business. The positive growth rate is the share of the surviving farms that had non-negative asset growth, which means they either grew or they remained the same size. And then the success rate, as I mentioned earlier, is the share of farms that survived and grew. And because of time constraints, I'm only going to show the results for small beginning farms, which I define as those with less than $250,000 in farm real estate assets. Next slide, please. The first slide shows the outcomes by farm size, which is measured using the value of farm real estate assets. So these small beginning farms are divided into 5 categories: 10 to 50,000 in assets, 50 to 100,000, 100 to 150, 150 to 200, and 200 to $250,000 in assets. The bars on the left show the survival rates for farms in each size category. You can see that the survival rates increase with the size of the farm. The smallest farms had a survival rate of 37% compared to 49% for the larger farms in the largest group. The middle set of bars shows the positive growth rates decrease with farm size. The smallest farms had a positive growth rate of 85% compared to 59% for the largest farms. This might be explained by the fact that larger farms are more likely to be operated by older farmers who may be downsizing their operations before retirement. With scale being positively correlated with survival and negatively correlated with growth, the results show only a weak negative correlation between scale and farm business success. Next slide, please. This slide shows the relationship for productivity, which we measure as the total value of production per unit of farm assets. There's 3 productivity categories, which we can call low, medium, and high. Productivity is positively correlated with positive growth, but somewhat surprisingly, we don't see a relationship between productivity and survival. In terms of success, productivity is quite important. Low productivity farms have about a 25% chance of success compared to a 35% chance for high productivity farms. This relationship might be explained by the fact that productivity is correlated with profitability, and owners of more profitable farms have greater access to financial resources with which to expand production. Next slide, please. This slide compares farms that received government payments to those that did not. We see that recipients had higher rates of survival, positive growth, and success. In terms of success, 38% of farms that received payments succeeded compared to 29% for those not receiving payments. These findings are consistent with earlier studies that found payments are associated with an increased likelihood and duration of farm business survival for crop farms. So this study shows that the effect also holds for beginning farms and that government payments are also correlated with success. Next slide, please. So because of time constraints, I'll just show one more graph. It displays the outcomes by the gender of the principal operator. On average, male principal operators have higher survival growth and success rates than female operators. However, I should emphasize that these charts only show correlations which are useful for illustrating the performance of groups of farmers. These summary statistics do not control for factors like farm size, commodity specialization, age of the operator, and so on. So we can't necessarily attribute these differences to gender alone. A regression analysis would allow us to distinguish the effects of individual factors while holding other operator and farm characteristics the same. I don't have time to go into those regression analyses here, but that is something we do in the study. Next slide, please. So let me turn to credit constraints and farm success. How do we know whether a farm faces a binding credit constraint? Most of the research on this has been focused on non-farm businesses. And one approach used in past studies to identify credit constraints, and the one that we use in this study, is to use financial measures that are correlated with access to credit. These measures could include profitability, liquidity, solvency, repayment capacity, or if available, a credit rating score. In this study, we use a high interest expense ratio as an indicator of a credit constraint. The interest expense ratio is defined as the interest expenses paid by the farm divided by the total value of production. The ratio indicates the level of farm debt relative to the farmer's ability to pay the debt. We define a farm as being credit constrained if it has an interest expense ratio in the top 5% of all beginning farmers. Lenders should be unlikely to make new loans to these farmers because their debt levels are high relative to their gross income. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the relationship that's estimated from the data between the interest expense ratio and the borrowing and new borrowing for all beginning farms, and that continued in business for 5 years. The x-axis shows the interest expense ratio percentile, and the y-axis shows the change in the interest expenses over 5 years. So most farms had declining interest expenses over time, which likely reflects the fact that farmers borrow less as they age, and the fact that interest rates were declining over the study period. Farms in the top 5%, which are circled in red, are the ones we're considering credit constrained. Figure shows these farmers had the biggest declines in interest expenses over time. This is exactly what we would expect if a farmer were credit constrained, so it validates this credit constraint indicator that we're using. Next slide, please. So next I'm going to show some regression estimates of the effect of being credit constrained on 4 outcomes. The change in the interest expenses, which is a measure of borrowing, the survival probability, the growth rate, and the success probability. The regressions control for several farm characteristics, including farm size, tenancy arrangement, government payments, productivity, and so on. Also control for operator characteristics, such as the age, primary occupation of the operator, gender, and race, and we control for the census year, location, and the local unemployment rate in the county. Next slide, please. So these are some of the key results from our regression analysis. The first row in the table shows the estimated effect of being credit constrained on farm borrowing for all farms and for small farms. The results in the right-hand column show that if a small beginning farm is credit constrained, then the interest expenses will decline by an estimated $4,768 over 5 years, more than it would decline for a similar beginning farm that was not credit constrained. If we make some assumptions about the interest rate in the debt term, this translates to approximately $57,000 less new debt over 5 years for farms that are credit constrained. Regression results also indicate that being credit constrained is associated with lower survival, growth, and success rates. Small beginning farms, being credit constrained lowers the probability of surviving by 9.5 percentage points, lowers the growth rate by 7.6 percentage points, and it lowers the success probability by 13.6 percentage points. These are fairly large effects and are all highly statistically significant. Next slide, please. So it's possible to make a few conclusions for how the results of the study could inform policy. First, if policymakers want to direct resources at beginning farmers with lower levels of farm business success, in other words, to target farms that they believe need the most help, perhaps, then these results would suggest targeting farmers who do not receive agricultural payments, those farms with lower productivity, producers of specific commodities, farms that have principal operators from socially disadvantaged racial groups, and principal operators who are female. The results also suggest a couple possible mechanisms for raising success rates. The first would be to increase access to agricultural program payments. We find in a regression analysis that I didn't have time to discuss that farmers with relatively high payments were more successful even after controlling for size, commodity specialization, and other farm and operator characteristics. A second focus would be on raising farm productivity. Higher productivity generally implies higher profits and hence greater survival rates and growth rates. And the last slide, please. Finally, the regression results suggest that policies that relieve credit constraints could significantly improve outcomes for beginning farmers by raising farm survival, growth, and success rates. Policies to reduce credit constraints for beginning farmers might include less strict collateral or less strict income requirements for loans. These types of policies would allow young farmers who have not acquired large amounts of savings to grow more rapidly and presumably to obtain higher levels of farm income and profit. Some USDA loan programs have low down payment requirements and less strict income verification, farming experience, and yield history requirements for qualified beginning farmers. The connection that we observed between credit constraints and farm success suggests that these types of USDA efforts to promote credit access will lead to higher success rates for beginning farmers. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll hand it back to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Next up is Mark Edelman. Mark, please go ahead. Mark, it looks like you're muted.
Thank you. One of the new tricks of the trade as we begin to conference virtually, but I agree with the notion of bringing folks together from wide ranging places across the country and recognizing that what I'm doing here is a little bit different. I'm a career extension, university extension employee, started in 1981 at South Dakota State and have been at Iowa State since 1986, working in agricultural policy and extension work, as well as teaching and research on campus. But my primary focus has been on extension. I once upon a time was a beginning farmer during the 70s, and that's how I financed my way through college. Today, I'm sort of an absentee, partial absentee landowner that's assisting a young farm family in their operations in my home state. But it's always been an area of interest over my career, is to figure out how to bring new collaborations together where there's resource capacity. And if we could go to the next slide to give you a little perspective on that, for the last 20 years, I've been the Community Vitality Center Director in the Department of Economics at Iowa State, where our primary focus in the center has been on providing dialogue and demonstration projects involving actionable studies that actionable strategies for rural economic development. And certainly access to capital is of concern, opportunity is concern. We actually started some micro-lending operations utilizing nonprofits and SBA and USDA RMAP program back in about 2008, because we learned that some banks, not all banks, but some banks and lenders saw small startups as high risk and potentially less profitable operations that required more cost than other larger loans. So that's something that's always been an area of interest of mine. And in this case, we're looking, we're one of 17 grants that Dr. Chitra talked about that's NIFA funded for ag vets. last year, we had this same somewhat similar collaboration that focused on the veterans and socially disadvantaged farmer grants that USDA provides to pull together resource capacities to see if we could move forward the ball in this arena in our state and region. So pathways to institutional innovation are something that we've been interested in. Various groups sometimes have to have an invitation and be asked and to be made aware of some of the grant opportunities that are available. And in this particular case, we found a number of entities that had the kinds of potential for capacity and collaboration and interest in the mission to come together with grant incentives to help that occur over the next 3 years. Next slide. So it's connecting ag vets. We started in this collaboration. This is more of a research into how do you pull together resources to assist farmers. And this is one institutional model for doing so. We started with a Veterans in Agriculture nonprofit organization that annually receives contacts from about 100 veterans and military personnel that are soon to be leaving the military, and pulls them into a network of 300 stakeholders of veterans who have developed a network in Iowa and the Midwest. Of the contacts, about 50% are from Iowa located veterans, and the other half is from national areas from Texas or California that are interested in how to get into farming. The executive director of this particular program is a former USDA FSA beginning county director who's very familiar with beginning farmer programs of USDA. So that's very useful. They're co-located with the Extension Beginning Farmer Center in Iowa, and that particular center runs the AgLink Connections program for those interested in starting farming and making connections with retiring farmers, and they've made about 150 ag links over the years that they've been in business. One thing though, they currently have a waiting list of about 740 young farmers looking for opportunities, but only 34 retiring farmers in their database. And so there is a little bit of a offset there in what's available. But they annually do beginning farmer workshops and have a good reputation for covering the broad set of topics for commercial ag. We also have in this collaboration Extension's food, farm food and enterprise development program, which works with the local food networks across the state and are interested in developing niche markets, and it partners with the Practical Farmers of Iowa organization, which is a network of excuse me, local food and producers in the state. Iowa Microloan is the grant administrator. It's one of the micro lending entities that's an SBA microloan intermediary along with the USDA RMAP intermediary. They've provided loans to 140 clients over the last 10 years, plus they also provide loan administration services for another nonprofit that provides smaller loans, less than $6,000 to low-income minority entrepreneurs. And I would say about 20% of the microloan clients in their portfolio are ag-oriented kinds of value-added agriculture enterprises. Ag Ventures Alliance Co-op is the last partner in this particular collaboration. They're an early stage agri-food tech fund with a mission of improving profitability for farmers. based in Mason City, Iowa. They basically started with one of the early ethanol plants as a project, and since then they've grown into an early stage fund. More recently, as their older membership subsides, they're very interested in building young farmer members, and so they have a portfolio currently of about 25 early stage companies, all focused on a variety of innovations to help farmers improve profitability, all the way from drones that spray, that provide spot spraying kinds of activities, carbon market ventures, swine tech to save baby pigs, and a whole list of about 20 to 25 portfolio companies, each with their own innovation. And the Young Farmer Research Network that they've created works with these startup companies on some of their products to help them get the kinks out of their products, and in return for equity into the emerging company. Then they also have a Countryside Angels investor network that looks at deals that provide equity that angel investors in their network potentially have some interest in possibly investing. Next slide. So there's three models that we're looking to tranche the inquiries into. One is a local food niche market tranche that involves veterans in agriculture, extensions, farm, food, and enterprise development program, and practical farmers of Iowa that may involve apprenticeships, classroom work and workshops, ag finance, and lean niche marketing development. The second model, next slide, has to do with commercial production agriculture. This is more the commodity agriculture, traditional extension beginning farmer center workshops and area extension farm management specialists each have sort of areas of expertise that they bring into, whether it's finance or marketing or succession planning, into the workshops. That's also where the AgLink program is connected, and they have a network of young commercial farmers and mentors that work with those who would be involved in this model 2 tranche in the program. The next slide highlights the third approach, which is value-added supply chain opportunities, and here's where we connect the Iowa Microloan Program, Ag Ventures Alliance, and the Extension Beginning Farmer Center into really ferreting out what the specific goals and gaps that each client may have in developing their next step in their planning. Next slide, please. So the ag entry pathways are each of the three models. Starts with an assessment of family and business goals, initial endowments in terms of skills and capital, and then an assessment of what opportunities and focus would each client like to pursue. And so it may be ag production, local niche markets, or value-added supply chain innovations. Next slide. Some of the ag entry trade-offs are when some of these veterans go into the military, farming may look quite a bit different from their family farm operation when they left the farm than what it does now. Economies of size has been pointed out versus labor intensity are a big area of concern. What can you do with your resource set and capital that you're bringing to back home to the startup situation, and is your family involved, or what are the opportunities that are there? Now, we're seeing on campus with a number of students in our ag startup engine at Iowa State, nearly all of the business plans that are developed involve a team effort. Oftentimes, the logical reason for that is that no one person is often has exceptional capabilities in production, in financial management, or in marketing. And so oftentimes a startup entity has to build an advisory team and venture that brings together the appropriate expertise to check all those boxes in the matrix. By joining a family operation that's been operating for years, of course, that resolves some of that issue if you're joining a team. But if you're trying to do a startup on your own, then that raises a different set of issues. Oftentimes, off-farm employment is a big thing for getting the wherewithal to solve both family and farm goals in the process. Diversification, ability to pivot. One of the interesting ideas that emerged in the western part of our state a couple of years ago in the large scale operation, of course, is Lincoln Premium Poultry that's connected with Costco, building a poultry network of 500 barns that would meet, say, like the standards for selling chicken in California, where it's non-caged production practices that meet all the environmental standards. And it was interesting to note that many farmers in Western Iowa attracted about 100 of those barns from existing farm operations. And many of the farmers in those situations and in those counties saw it as an opportunity to bring the next generation back into the farming operation. In part, even though each barn in a 4-barn set may cost $500,000, the financial plans and marketing plans connection was there. The contracts also provided $120,000 labor package. And so you have to look at each situation and evaluate the risk and the opportunity. But there are different models for entering into the production ag space. Commodity versus value added is something that many young farmers consider. What can I do to add direct marketing or value added enterprises for part of the operation in order to diversify the risk? Market access, proximity, and scalability become important. For example, 2 of the ventures that Ag Ventures Alliance has helped to get started are pilot farming operations for aquaculture and shrimp production and vertical greens, microgreens production that could be done even in an urban agriculture setting. Next slide. So why target veterans? And our former Secretary Vilsack always used to like to point out that about half of our veterans are from rural America. And so it makes sense that they might want to pursue opportunities that are back home on the farm or in a rural community. And as has been pointed out before, our farming average age is getting older. And young farmers raise the question, who's going to be doing the farming in the future? And so that's why this whole area is important. Next slide. So I just put little contact information on each of the collaborators that are in this particular project, and look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Next up is Bruce Ahrendsen. Bruce, take it away.
All right, thank you, Gary. Hopefully everything can hear me just fine. And yes, I'm at the University of Arkansas. I grew up in Iowa, so it was good to hear from Mark on what's going on in Iowa, actually from a family farm. The family's still farming as well. I did some ag lending for a number of years. And so I continue to do that by doing teaching and research in agricultural finance. So I want to appreciate the Farm Foundation and Economic Research Service for putting on this important conference. So I want to acknowledge co-authors. Charles Dodson will be speaking here in a minute, as well as Drs. Rainey, Snell, and Dixon here at the University of Arkansas with me. This work is partially supported by NEFA as well as the Farm Credit Council, but the views are mine here that I present today and not necessarily of others. So what I want to do is kind of give some groundwork on what are some young and beginning farmers. How many are there? What share of all farm operations are young or beginning farm operations? And look at some recent changes. And then I'm going to be looking at those that actually have paid interest expense and what share are actually beginning or young farm operations. This gauge lender success and potential gaps, that's a big topic area that will, I think, be addressed better in the next paper by Charles. But I'm defining young as those that are under 35 years of age, beginning farm operations that have experience operating any farm for 10 or fewer years. And then among those, I'm going to break out into different types of socially disadvantaged groups. I won't have time to go to the state level, but we're also looking down at the state level. So socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers as defined by the USDA are women, Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, Black or African American, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, and then Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders. We have seen recently from 2012 to 2017 a huge increase in the number of socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, but that's primarily women. That's where all the increase has occurred, is among women operators. And I'll say it's all ages and all experience of women. So that's including those young and beginning farm operators. So what I'm looking at is just 2 years, the Census of Agriculture data from NASS from 2012 to 2017. There were some differences that could explain some of the number change, but I think there are real increases in the number of women operators, and I'll show how large of increase that is. And you can see here by what's the definition of who is that primary producer or principal operator, and I'll use those interchangeably here. So looking at the number of primary producers or principal operators that are socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. So there are 489,000, nearly 1 out of 4 operations have a primary producer that's a woman. And that's over 200,000 increase in the number of these operators from 2012. And pretty much all the increase in this total socially disadvantaged farmer and rancher group has been by women increases. The other categories have been pretty much the same, small increases or small decreases, but holding their own in the other socially disadvantaged groups. Again, this is looking at 2012, the numbers really didn't change except for those women operators. So there's been a huge increase in the number of women operations. And as we'll see, it's also among those that are young or beginning. So here are some, there are lots of bars here, but this is looking at women operations, for example, by different socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher groups, and going from 2012 to 2017. Overall, there's been an increase in the number of operators that are young and the share of operators that are young. So if we look at women, it went from a little over 4% of all women operators were young, that is under 35 years of age. And if we go to 2017, the share of those women operators, remember, there was a huge increase in the number of women operators, the share of those women operators that are young has increased as well. Still small percentages that are under 35, but again, a large increase in that. And that is occurring over every category, including Black and African American. But there you'll see it's a much smaller share that are young operators, just about 2.5%. We saw Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander groups within that group of socially disadvantaged status. That was one where the share had decreased for those that were young. And we see the last way over to the right is really white males, those that are total group of non-socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. And that share of those operators that are young has also increased somewhat. Now I'm looking at just those that have reported interest expense and what share of young operators that are from that group that have reported interest expense. And like we saw earlier, the share that are young women has increased dramatically, and that's the same for Hispanic, American Indian. But some groups, the share that are young has actually declined a little bit, and that's hard to really know. There has been some reduction in interest expense, but it could be a lot to do to different types of farm operations, perhaps. We even see for the last category, the total non-socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, or white male primary producers, they have actually declined their share that are young operators. Now let's look at beginning farm operations, and those are the ones with 10 or fewer years of experience. We see there's a large share of operations that are in that group that have anywhere from or less than 10 years or 10 years of experience operating any farm. And we see there have been increases across the board, except for perhaps Asian operations. So among those Asian operators, those that are beginning farmers, has stayed about the same, that share, but at relatively high levels. Over 35% of Asian producers are beginning operators. We see the women shares increase, Hispanic, American Indian or Alaska Native, Black or African American, across the board, including white male operators, that there's more beginning farmers and ranchers, and the share of those that are beginning farmers and ranchers has increased as well. So if I, again, look at just those that are reporting interest expense in the Census of Agriculture, there has been some mixed results. Pretty much for all farm operations, it remained about the same share of operations are reporting interest expense. However, if we that are beginning operators, I should say, but if we look at some groups, a lot of the groups have increased somewhat. Where most of this has declined a little bit would have been among white male operators that are beginning farmers and ranchers. Yes, I didn't have time to go through all the states, so thank you for advancing through there. Here are some general results that we've found. There are geographic concentration for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, except for women. Women are everywhere. There are women operators across the United States, young and beginning operators. So there's not necessarily a geographic concentration there. They tend to be more likely to be a beginning farmer operation. So we saw that in the results. A higher share of those women operators are beginning operators. The same can be said for Hispanic operators, more likely to be beginning operators. They tend to have smaller farm production and more likely to have specialty crops. American Indian or Alaska Native producers are younger, more likely to be female. This is one group where it's about the same as all farmers in general that are their share of operators that are beginning. Black or African American producers tend to be older. We saw that there's a much smaller share of those operators that are either young or beginning operations. Is that a question of getting credit, scale of operation? That's something to look into some further. Asian producers are more likely to be beginning farmers and ranchers. They tend to have a slightly larger farm production, and that could be related to more likely having a specialty crop farm business. So where do we go from here? There's lots of avenues for future research, looking at differences between beginning young and farmers and ranchers, and those that are among socially disadvantaged farmers and non-socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. Then looking among those socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers differences, but have to go even deeper than that, because there are huge differences within different groups of farm operations on looking at their access to credit and are they getting the access they need to be successful businesses. So we have to look at within those groups as well. Here we're looking at just having interest paid. Is that enough? When I was looking at beginning farmers and ranchers, they don't have any interest expenses if they're truly beginning. They're in the process of trying to get access to credit, and they're trying to sell their credit worthiness. And I think we've talked about having an effective plan, a real good business plan that not only includes how many dollars of funds they're going to need to become a successful business. They also want to know, lenders want to know not only how much they want to borrow and when, but how they're going to get repaid. Lenders, they looking at that whole plan of how is this going to be a credit-worthy business. And that's what beginning farmers and ranchers need to do, is really sell their credit worthiness to be able to attract that credit. And then looking at farm production, is the level of production, that's hard for beginning farmers and ranchers to have that sufficient scale of operation to really jump in at a sufficient size to be successful. Anyhow, those are some of my thoughts. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. We look forward to having some questions of you in the future. I would point out that your slides and the other speakers' slides will be available. They will be posted on this conference website. So Charles, with that, please take us on through your.
Okay. Here you go. I'm Charles Dodson. I'm with the USDA's Farm Production and Conservation Group. I work with the Economic and Policy Analysis Division. If you aren't familiar with who we are, the Farm Production Analysis and Conservation is kind of the administrative functions with respect to the big farm level agencies within the USDA, Farm Service Agency, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and RMA. The Economic Policy Analysis Division is a group of basically provides a lot of the analytical backbone to these agencies. There's some economists and analysts and data scientists, etc. So that's who we are. I'm located in Washington, D.C., as is most of our group. What I work on to a large extent over my career has been credit. And what we'll talk about today is kind of the use of credit by young beginning farmers with a huge with an emphasis on USDA's lending programs. Let's move to the first slide and kind of give an overview. One thing that's true is our USDA farm credit programs are highly targeted at beginning farmers. It reflects a public policy focus generated from concerns arising from the aging farm population and farm consolidation. Policymakers are concerned about continuity of production and farm structure, i.e. maintaining a family-sized farm. The adage frequently heard and just repeated by Mark a few minutes ago is that when people look at the size of or the age of farmers in the census, the response is who is going to farm the land. So that's the policymaker's perspective. From a financial economist like myself and others are concerned about informational asymmetries. That is, and the impacts it has on efficiency. And informational asymmetry simply means that two participants in market transactions don't have the same set of information. If you want an example, just think of a used car sale. The seller has access to more information than the buyer, and as we have all probably experienced at some point in their lives. That gives a seller an upper hand in negotiations. One thing about agriculture is as it has become much more technical and specialized, and operations are larger and more complex, this informational asymmetry becomes a little more of an issue. It's accentuated in lending because likewise lenders have become more consolidated and centralized in much of small business functions, and there's greater distance basically in the information world and in the physical distance world between perhaps a lender and their borrower. Young and beginning farmers are more adversely impacted by these kind of factors. It's not necessarily in contention. It's not necessarily that they are that they are being discriminated against because they're young and beginning. It's because they just don't have the track record, and that long-term relationship they build up with perhaps the lender or individuals, other individuals over time to get that trust. And so what happens is it kind of amplifies, being a young beginning farmer can amplify any kind of shortcomings they already have, like cash flow or production history, etc. And this is nothing new. I mean, economists have known about this for decades. It's this informational asymmetry problem is kind of the crux of all the federal credit programs, whether it be in farming, small business loans, or in student loans. In USDA, we have two programs that kind of, there's a lot is sent to address a lot of these kind of issues. The direct lending program, which is where our loans are originated and serviced by our own county offices, and then a guaranteed program, which is where these loans are made by commercial lenders and guaranteed by USDA. Generally for beginning farmers, it's at the 95% level. We'll move over to the next slide. And like I said, most of our programs are highly targeted. And what I've done here is, this is just simply gives you a perspective, but the blue is beginning or young farmers, and the orange is non-beginning SDAs, which Bruce just briefly had defined a few minutes ago, and the other is non-targeted groups. Now, I should mention that we don't explicitly target young farmers. Ours is basically on beginning, but typically a beginning farmer is young. And what we've done here is kind of draw it. I put these all together to kind of see what our share is of borrowers getting loans in each individual year within a targeted group. And as you can very well see, for the direct real estate, it's a direct FO on the left-hand side. The right-hand side is OLs or operating loans. And both cases, about 70% of our borrowers in the last few years have been members of younger beginning farmer groups, and about 10% being SDAs. Next slide, we'll move forward to the next slide. And for the guarantee program, about a third, it's a lot less, about a third of the borrowers each individual year are either members of a beginning farmer, young beginning farmers, or a historically underserved group. So that's what we call it, our SDAs. Again, this is just reflective general policy focus. It's not how we run the program. It's basically how we're directed on the program by Congress and OMB, who's taken their general role as a direct lending should be much more focused on these targeted groups, while guaranteed lending is a broader kind of programs. Next slide now. Well, like all applicants, a beginning farmer must still meet all the standard eligibility and feasibility criteria. That includes, the purpose here is not necessarily to have a different set of eligibility criteria. It's really to move the young and beginning farmers further up in the queue so that they get the loans first. They still meet the same criteria that they have to have. They have to labor and management, appropriate expertise, not delinquent any federal debt. You can look on our fact sheets and our web pages, and you can see the extent of our eligibility criteria, which can be, there's a large number of those, but there are a few things that are different, and we have to meet the definition of beginning farmer, obviously, and it's operated farm for at least 10 years. They substantially participate in the operation. That's really no different either. That's just pointed out because we don't really mention primary or secondary or tertiary operator. It's just that they can still be a secondary operator on operation as long as they can develop a separate business plan. There are some size requirements, and they for IFO loans, real estate loans, particularly with respect to some of our programs are explicitly targeted to beginning farmers. That would be the down payment loan programs, but and that is unique. And the final one here is that, kind of about entities. If they're in entities, well, obvious things, they have to be all related some way, but through blood or marriage. But more importantly, if they apply for loans in an entity, everyone in that entity has to be a beginning farmer. However, you need to understand, though, that just because it doesn't preclude anyone individual from not getting a loan, they just have to stand on the loan as a separate business plan if they do. Now, what do we mean by a business plan? Is they have to have cash flow, it's adequate security and profitability, etc. They can secure the loan adequately, i.e. just simply be creditworthy. But very importantly, they have to be unable to obtain commercial credit at reasonable rates and terms with or without a guarantee. So if you put these two things together, it's really a standard definition of credit rationing. Now, what I did is the same done for years, is a fairly unique thing where we look at the number of farmers from our own administrative data with respect to loans, who are the direct and guaranteed borrowers, and we look at that and match that with ARMS data, which has some information on characteristics. So we can get some fairly granular data with respect to this, and it is fairly unique, and I've been doing this for a number of years. But the numerator in this case is just simply the number of farms with either a direct or guaranteed loan during the year that comes out of our own FSA data, divided by the number of farms, at least $100 of interest expense and $5,000 in sales from the ARMS. And that's kind of designed to get a unique idea of what our cohort would be. If we'll let's skip this slide and move on to the next one. Go ahead and skip this slide, there you go. Well, what we did here was, what I did was look, one of the things you expect is that as credit constraints become more pertinent or more relevant as you get to more complex farms, we looked at the market penetration for different size groups. And what we did was use the classification system that ERS uses in their farm typology, or at least some proximity of that. And these, you may be familiar with those, but it kind of defines everything as small, mid-sized, and large farms. Small farms are basically $100,000 to $350,000 in sales. If they're under 100,000 in sales, they can be included in this category if the farmer occupation is farming and they supply a certain amount of labor. Mid-size is 350 to 1 million, and large is very clearly it's over 1 million in sales. It's non-family farms are excluded from these categories. But the two things to note is, one, the orange bar, which is the young beginning, is always larger than the blue bar, which is just for all indebted farms. And that's where you may say that, well, you're obviously targeting these groups, you expect it to be greater. But keep in mind that one of the criteria, eligibility criteria, is that they have to meet a credit constraint. So you would not think that if they weren't meeting a credit constraint, they shouldn't be eligible for our credit. So it is an indication that we do see a little more reliance on practically beginning farmers on FSA credit. Another thing I'd note is how, as you go, kind of peaks there in the mid-sized category, it's at 350,000 in sales up to 1 million. And what that may be reflecting is it's kind of that squeeze category, and they've been squeezed for this. The mid-size has always been squeezed as long as I've looked at this information. I guess the adage is that you're too large, you're not large enough to have the returns to make the investments in the operation and pay family living expenses, et cetera, but you have too many on-farm labor requirements to really just to benefit from off-farm employment. So you get caught in that size squeeze area. We'll move forward to the next slide. And like I said, I've been looking at this for a number of years, this matching this stuff uniquely. And it's one thing that really shows up, and this is the data I've averaged from 2015 to 2018. I should point out that 2018 is the last year we have available arms right now that I could merge. But you see a consistent story kind of shows up on these is we have a reliance on small farms that relied on direct debt. Mid-sized farms tend to use both direct and guaranteed. Where you get in large farms, you have a greater reliance on guaranteed credit. And two things you would note, another thing you note is the right-hand side is young and beginning farmers, and the size of the bars are you see a little jumping there. So it's fairly, I think it's, you're looking at 4 years of data, and it's pretty, at this point, I think the trend's fairly clear, but you're looking at around 1 in 4 mid-sized farms operated by young and beginning farmers are receiving at least some of their credit from either direct or FSA guaranteed loans, which is a pretty good indication that there's some credit constraints that these individuals are facing. Let's move forward to the next slide. There you go. And it also, this is a very busy graph, but I'll try to hone in on some of the points. What we're doing here, this is not ARMS, it's actually census data. And what I did was look at the borrowers we had in 2017, direct and guaranteed, in each, not county, but county office area is served by FSA, divided over where is a share of indebted farms in each of those counties, county office areas. We did county office areas instead of counties because that will account for a lot of counties don't have any farms, and we have FSA county office areas that cover those consolidate them into one administrative area, like examples would be West Virginia, where you have county or FSA offices that may serve 15 counties. So it's a little easier, so you don't look at these areas with no farms, for example, but you see it better. It makes a nice graph. The blue colors, if you like the light blues in the lower colors, is kind of where lower reliance on FSA, whereas the red and orange are higher reliance on FSA. And what you would note is you look at the Heartland, for example, and where you see agriculture is more common in the area, farming dependent areas like that. Our reliance is, as you kind of right around the average, but it's where you look at some of these more fringe areas, such as the Northeast, the Appalachian part of the country, Southwest, Southeast, Mountain West, and you also notice the Western Plains, maybe, where you see a greater reliance on FSA credit programs, which may be consistent with that kind of impacts of geographic distance. It's not, I don't think I can really, at this point, I really couldn't tell much difference between beginning and all indebted farm in this case, but definitely if you've got areas that are probably where you may have a greater thinness of agricultural, both lenders and borrowers, you're going to have beginning farmers would have a more likely to face a credit constraint. Let's skip the next slide, doesn't venture the time, and we'll move on to the summary. Now what we've done, kind of the premise here is that our credit constraints that are faced would be accentuated for young and beginning farmers. And that's kind of what our market penetration analysis shows, is that, and when I look at this, you see that young and beginning farmers tend to be more reliant in general on FSA credit, and that would be an indication that they are more likely to face credit constraints. And FSA's credit programs tend to be at least serving as somewhat of a role in meeting those needs. That is especially, I think, is one of the striking things as you look at particularly the mid-sized family farm operations, where you see that 1 in 4 over the last 4 years have getting at least some of their credit from FSA. Is kind of reflects the importance of our role, and that's always been one of my major tenets of mentioning when I present this information. Is when you look at the market share of FSA, it's around 6%. But when you drill down and look at some of the groups we're intended to be served, and it does show that the footprint is much more important, and the role that these programs play in ensuring credit to these groups is much more critical. What I've done here is mostly focus on effectiveness, and that's what was truly find is just meeting the intended group. What is really needed, if there's a need for future research, is more of an outcome-based approach. And it's a lot of what kind of what Nigel was talking about earlier in his presentation. And I think we actually tried to get something going like this at one time. But what is really needed is more, what impacts do the credit programs can we have on young and beginning farmers over a longer period of time as it affects our viability or growth of income or growth of wealth, etc. At this point, I'll finish my presentation. And first, I thank the Farm Foundation and Economic Research Service allowing us to present this, providing a forum to present this information and discuss it, and look forward to any discussion or questions that may come up later.
Very good. Thank you, Charles. This is the time of a presentation where, as moderator, I would ask for applause from the audience. So if you feel the urge, please clap to yourself at home. We'll feel the appreciation. We've had some questions coming in. Just to start it off, I'll address this to Bruce first, and then ask the other panelists to join in. We've been talking a lot about credit and various aspects of it. So I think a very basic question might be, why are the costs and conditions of farm business lending so different than consumer lending, such as for a home mortgage?
Well, I think what Charles had raised earlier is this asymmetric. I mean, there is so much information, a lot of specialized lenders to know the uniqueness of farm businesses. I've had lenders that said, wow, I really need to get an ag business student on our staff because I don't know how to do these poultry loans. They're so much different. And so getting that uniqueness, the seasonality, the capital intensive nature of the business, those are all things that make it difficult, really difficult to try to get access to credit. I think that goes back to trying to then you really have to communicate with that lender what your plan is and really build that relationship with them.
Charles, do you have an opinion on why consumer lending is so different than farm business lending?
I would just point out, if anybody's familiar with this, have you ever looked at the Farm Equity Manager or FinPac and those packages? And if you really want to know the question of why it's different, look at what we use as our farm business plan. That's the Equity Manager, and the detail you can look at those, and you can Google them and see, or anything of it. The detail that is required. I mean, that's what lenders use. The detail that is just so is so much there as compared to consumer lending. You think consumer lending is a lot, and I've just closed a couple of loans myself in recent years, not too time, but the information that we have to go into these farm business plans to do a feasibility analysis, and the examples of you look of all these other programs is just so detailed and so broad. It's not really comparable to, I guess, small business. It's not really comparable to small business. It's not really comparable to consumer lending. It's really comparable to small business lending.
Yeah, I think, could I just say something too? I think the question was comparing it to mortgages on rental properties. And there, I think the lender could repossess the property for fairly low cost, perhaps. If Chapter 12 protection might make it more difficult for lenders to recoup their lost investments, perhaps. So I kind of wonder how much bankruptcy protection might have something to do with that, in comparing at least real estate loans to farm loans. But I think what Charles said is correct. It's much more comparable to compare them to small business loans than to real estate investment loans.
I could add to that that we did a survey of banks about a decade ago and found that bankers thought there was a need for, you don't normally get bankers to admit that there might be a need for a specialized loan program. But anyway, they suggested that one of the reasons that they don't do loans in startups in the cases that didn't was in part because they didn't have the expertise and underwriting capacity for unique enterprises. And many beginning farmers, particularly in local foods and everything that we were going through the area of growth there, many local banks didn't feel like they might have had one ag loan officer, but it was more focused on traditional commodity agriculture rather than specialty enterprises. And so that can be something that would be solved by a larger network and institution like USDA's programs or farm credits programs, that somewhere in their system there's likely expertise to underwrite unique enterprises that emerge.
Thank you, Mark. Our next question, beginning farmers are traditionally in rural areas. How does USDA view urban agriculture farms? And of course, credit access for urban agriculture farms. Mark, I think you just addressed this a little bit with your comment about the different, having a loan officer that understands the different types of businesses. But Charles, does USDA treat urban agriculture differently in some way?
Well, it's they still have to be the same a lot of the same requirements, and actually we do have I've come across, we have products that have made in urban areas that I don't know, there are different kinds of urban, when you're talking about, I don't know that we've really got in the technology to for us to do the roof type farming kind of things, but I've come across loans where we have been made to for examples of mushroom growers in warehouses in inner cities, for example. We have produced people that have gotten lots in vacant lots in DC and made and producing flowers. You have people that have grown small plots in various urban areas to produce for ethnic markets. It's not a large thing, but we do have some outreach in that area. We are working. More recently we're developing pilot programs to do with get more involvement on the part of some of our county office committees, for example, in urban agriculture and bringing those into the fold. But yeah, we are making some progress. You don't see it much in the numbers yet. I see some anecdotal evidence, and so.
Yeah, I think it's important for the lender to just be open to these different ideas. Everyone has their comfort zone, but you have to be able to look at something that's maybe different than what's they're typically used to, and at least consider it and go through and look at what the plan is for that business. So I think that's an important part of it, is just to be open-minded to those type of loan applications. And then the person that's trying to get that loan, get that credit, to really be able to come together with a plan.
Well, one of the questions that got quite a bit of support was about a presumption that I'm not sure is necessarily true, that lenders for beginning farmers are saying no to startups due to the global pandemic. I'd ask that you consider that, and what is the best time for someone to approach a lender? How is the global pandemic affecting lending to beginning farmers in your view?
Anybody doing work? We have looked at that just a little bit, and it kind of come up to play. And one of the interesting things we have found is that we really haven't seen any, as far as FSA goes, we haven't really seen a drop off in applications because of the pandemic. And actually, if you look at some of the areas been hit, some of our efficiencies have been pretty good. You know, we're closing them pretty quickly. It's at least from our perspective, we are seeing business as usual pretty much on applications. And I can't speak for the private lenders at this point, but we are seeing and we've been able to function from where those offices that are closed from people working out of their homes.
I would say that the two operations that I'm familiar with that have started right before the pandemic had to be ready to pivot quickly because they were operations that were focused on selling to higher end restaurants and institutional markets. And when all the restaurants, for example, shut down, they pivoted very quickly to community supported agriculture approaches and developing networks for delivery directly to consumers at home when folks were scared to go out during the couple of months of shutdown. And they've continued to grow their networks, but they did have to pivot. Most financial institutions would want to know, what's plan A and plan B. I'm not sure anybody could have predicted the pandemic, but they're most interested in your ability to repay. And if you've got a plan A and a plan B for repayment, that's at least a starting point for the conversation, I would think, during the pandemic.
Yeah, Gary, I don't think you can be too early, really, sometimes to really go in and or not maybe physically be able to go in, but actually start that communication with the lender on what your plan is. And Mark, when you were saying plan A, plan B, I was saying contingency plans, right? Having those contingency plans in place in this dynamic environment. But I think don't wait, go ahead and initiate that. Reach out to that lender as far as what your plan may be.
Nigel, any additional thoughts on that?
No, I don't have anything really to add to that. No.
I would point out just to pile on a little bit in a conference that Farm Credit put on with beginning farmers. Several who were direct to retail sellers noted that they might have had to borrow an additional amount of money to access a different marketing channel, as you just pointed out, Mark, where they could no longer sell to a restaurant, a high-end restaurant. They had to pivot and begin to sell in a different way. So maybe they had to buy CSA boxes or something like that. And that changed their need for credit so that they could take advantage of a new market opportunity. Overall, I think it's pretty safe to say that direct to retail sellers in general, not all, but in general, had a pretty good year this year because of that increased interest in local food. I'm wondering if you have an opinion on beginning farmers and ranchers carrying addition or excess student loan debt and how that would affect their capacity to access credit.
Well, I would say if I was looking at, I mean, you're going to look at the holistic financial obligations. So the more financial obligations, whether it be student loan debt, credit card debt, personal debt that may be in there is something to overcome, because those, for most businesses, it's going to either come from that other income that they have to pay those other debts, or it's going to be draws from the business. And so I think when you have that, the lender is going to look at that holistic obligations that there are on that particular owner of that business. So it's not that it's necessarily bad, but it does factor into the decision process.
Yeah, I would add to that you know, one pathway might not be to go directly back to the farm if you have a lot of college student debt, but to go out and figure out what kinds of farming operations you would envision for yourself maybe 10 years down the road, and go work for one of those entities to help reduce your student debt, but also at the same time to gain a more holistic perspective on how to manage and operate the kind of operation that you would see yourself running in 10 years, because the technology with precision farming and with focus on gut health and doing away with antibiotics and carbon sequestration, there's just an awful lot of innovations that are going on in the industry that the one who works in, depending on what kind of operation you want, are going to have to be up to speed on. And so that would provide an opportunity to reduce your debt, and also perhaps acquire some sort of part-time job opportunity, employment off the farm that could help cover healthcare and insurance and some things like that you would want to need for your family. I know in my home community, it was fortunate to have a couple of employers that made equipment that was sold internationally, and so there were a lot of fairly prosperous farmers in the community, in part because they worked in town during the day and did their farming in the evening. I'm not recommending that for any particular person, but I mean, there are different models for getting into farming.
Yeah, I would just iterate that and reiterate that, is that when we look at our stuff, and I don't really see for the FSA, you don't really see, you see a lot of student loan debt, but it's not a large amount as you'd probably expect it to be. And one of the arguments is that, like Mark said, I think a lot of those that probably do have the large amounts of student loan debts are probably are not looking to the farm and for employment for their jobs, or they've got a longer time period. But it's typically more like some of the, so interestingly, some of the young folks that apply for our loans have some of the best credit ratings that you would, FICO scores that come out. So,
Charles, is that just to drill down on that? Is that information from internal FSA data regarding student loan?
Yeah, we have internal, and if you come out and we can look and see where they got a Sally Mae loan. There's a lot of Sally Maes out there in our portfolio, but it's not as big as you would kind of, what you hear from the general economy is not as big as what you expect. So, and like you say, Mark's saying, those that do have those large student loan debts are probably not looking at agriculture. Kind of precludes them from going in.
Nigel, are there public sources, any way to cross-tabulate student loan debt and beginning farmers?
I think that would be administrative data that someone like Charles would have access to, but I don't think we disaggregated it on the census or the agricultural resource management survey.
Okay, great. So moving on to another topic, is the what do you think of AgLink programs? How to make them better? How can they be made better successful? What is it that the problem is of why they don't work? And in my experience, it seems that they pop up in quite a few places. And I'm not sure what exactly how to define their success, but it's an idea that seems to come back over and over again. Have any of you had experience with AgLink programs, and what do you think makes them work?
I'm hoping Mark has an answer to that, because
Well, that's been managed by our Beginning Farmer Center, which is located off campus. And I haven't been as close to that operation as to know what the barriers might be, or what some of the issues might be. So I do know that that the fellow who runs it is also on the program, I believe, tomorrow. David, I'll think of his name here in a little bit, but he's the one to ask, because he's been close to managing the program since the beginning. I'll get that name here just a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is great. If you're working with a retired farmer, it's also sometimes if you want the advice, you might actually have to follow it sometimes, or an expectation of that on it. And I just saw in my own family, sometimes that can be contentious there from one generation to another, but there's valuable information. They have had the experience, and it's a good way. You need that mentoring, I think, to someone to go to. So I think the concept is good, but I'm not familiar enough to know what makes it a great program or not.
David Baker is the name of the guy that's worked in extension for a long time and has managed the Iowa AgLink program. But that's all three of the sort of the approaches that are kind of being used in our AgVets program involves some sort of mentoring and coaching by folks who have been doing it for a while. And this extra link of and leverage of owning the land and also providing coaching advice is an interesting point that you've just made. Because you can see there's certain things you put up with family members that might not otherwise be kinds of things that you would want to put up with folks who are more distantly related. And so you have to choose your mentors in that kind of a situation very carefully.
Yeah. Mentors. Nigel, were you gonna?
I was just going to say we also have a session on land as a barrier to entry, and we have a session on transitions, both of which I think will be perhaps more closely related to that topic. So
Very good. Well, closer to our topic at hand, is the credit that beginning farmers are using more likely to be non-traditional? And I guess the questioner is asking a fairly broad view of non-traditional to include credit cards or income from off the farm. So what kind of credit does a beginning farmer use, and is that appropriate?
I looked at this issue a few years ago, and they may have changed. But using our data, you find that the credit cards weren't as big a problem with it was there, but it wasn't that big a problem. What you actually found was our major secondary creditor on most of our loan applications was John Deere credit. I mean, it was kind of and the equipment that was appeared to be with, at least that may be true of everyone, though. I don't know if that's true of Young and Beginning, but that's what I found. Was this was 3 or 4 years ago, looked at it, if you want to see the one particular group that stood out was John Deere.
Well, that's one color of that new paint disease, I think, that all farmers are subject to.
I would say also add to that since the nonprofits that I've worked with kind of also do sort of small business lending, they have seen quite a few over the last decade, quite a few credit cards used to start business ventures. And the SBA microloan program, for example, allows an entrepreneur to refinance using the credit card debt into working capital loans in their SBA microloan program. Now, I'm not so familiar with how that would work with Farm Credit or others, but use of credit cards to establish businesses is not that uncommon in sort of the small business entrepreneurship arena.
Yeah, I think as far as, I mean, I remember looking at loan applications once upon a time, and you'd see all sorts of creditors. And what makes that difference is when you have so many, that business owner is going to be getting pulled all different kinds of directions. I think it's good to have that kind of central focus so that you can really come up with more of a strategic plan for sourcing credit. I perfectly understanding have some alternative sources of credit to get started on that, but at some point I think it's good to really consolidate that so you can build that relationship and work together and have more of a comprehensive plan rather than here I got to pay this particular lender and then another lender, and before you know you're getting stretched many different directions.
Yeah, many of the socially disadvantaged entrepreneurs that we've worked with would have gotten into financial trouble with their credit cards and would have been. I mean, part of it is establishing financial responsibility and having the entrepreneur accept their responsibility. And that's part of what I think going to a strategic lender for helping to coach through that kind of a process where somebody has too much credit card debt or student debt or other kinds of debt is necessary before you make a jump into agricultural ventures, because you got to have your financial management under control.
Great. Well, as our last question, Don Thelmany points out that it's so interesting that by small farms by assets are less likely to survive, but those that do survive grow. Could it be that too many assets too fast creates a cash flow burden for the operation? Nigel, that question I think came out of your data.
I could take the first swing at that. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting too that we see the smaller farms tend to be the smaller farms that do survive grow the fastest, and I think part of that is they're the ones who really are further from their optimal size in a sense. They're the ones who really want to grow and have the most incentive to grow. They also tend to be younger, and so they have a longer time horizon for their investments. So that, if you're close to retirement, you're not likely to be looking to expand your operation a lot. Yeah, but the smaller farms are also less likely, have a lower survival rate. And I think, those were summary statistics. So we had the smaller farms are generally younger. They generally have less accumulated wealth, less net worth, and they tend to be more highly leveraged. They want to expand more, so they're taking on more debt and they're more highly leveraged. And as a result, if they're going to be less able to perhaps handle a pandemic or a price decline in their commodity or some other unforeseen event, and maybe more likely to go bankrupt or to just exit farming. So yeah, I think of course, when we see a small farm, there's a lot going on in the background. There's differences in wealth. There's differences in ages that could explain that phenomenon. If anybody else wants to.
Yeah, I think that's the wonder of leverage, right? That if things are going well, it can work pretty out well. So there could be just this differences on the particular business that if it's going well, you can really grow a lot with leverage, but if things go against you, you may not be long for it. So that's the trick.
Charles or Mark?
Nothing to add on my part.
Okay.
In here.
All right. I did want to point out one of the questions did relate to who exactly is a socially disadvantaged farmer and rancher with respect to women. That's just being female, isn't it, Nigel? Not a particular race involved in that or ethnicity.
Let me pass it on to Bruce since his talk was classifying them.
Right. So it's a female operator, right? And so you could have an African American female, and in those there would be qualified under a woman category, but also under African Americans. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, we're winding down on our time here. I very much appreciate all of you being a part of this panel and going through, Nigel, what determined farm business success, and Bruce talking about this credit usage stratified by race and farm size, and Charles, a new term for many of us, I think, informational asymmetries. I'm going to try to use that at the local coffee shop. And Mark, thanks very much for explaining your work with the Veterans in Agriculture plan at Iowa State. I think we've accomplished our role here in starting out this first session of this two-day event in terms of talking about what a lot of beginning farmers are talking about. How can I get access to credit? And we've covered that from several different perspectives, and I appreciate your willingness to be part of this and also to point us to some of the other topics that are going to be discussed later on in this two-day conference. With that, I will pass it back to Jeff Hopkins to tell us about how to meet up with all of our panelists in the lounge.
Thanks, Gary. And thanks for all the authors who presented their work. We had lots of questions we didn't get to, but you will be able to follow up individually with the authors of the study, and I encourage you to do that. We're going to go break for our lounge right now for the next 45 minutes. So in order to get to the lounge, if you just go for the networking, you just go to the My Event tab at the top of the page, and you can select lounge there. So hope to catch up with people there, and we'll start back with our next session where I will speak along with Sarah Campbell, who is the Beginning Farmer and Rancher National Coordinator. And we'll be talking about USDA agency resources. And that will be at 12:30 Eastern. I'm sorry, 12:30 Central, 1:30 Eastern. And look forward to catching up with you all some more there. So thanks.